Let me say this as clearly as possible right up front. If you're planning to apply to law school this fall or later, the rules you're planning around may already be obsolete. And the reason has nothing to do with the US news rankings, changes to the LSAT format, or the various admissions myths floating around. And it has everything to do with the federal government and the Trump administration and two policy changes that almost no applicants are connecting yet. And here is the short version. One change quietly cuts off unlimited federal funding for law school, and the other weakens the legitimacy filter that used to protect students from bad outcomes. And today, they're creating a system where you could get into law school, enroll, and still ruin your financial future, even if you did everything right. And this video is not meant to be political commentary. I don't care if you like Trump or if you hate Trump or if you are indifferent to Trump. But what you do need to understand is how money and law school accreditation are changing at the same time and why that combination is uniquely dangerous for law school applicants. Now, let's start with the change that directly affects your ability to pay for law school. Beginning in July 1st of this year, federal Grad Plus loans are eliminated for new borrowers. And these are the loans that quietly made modern law school pricing possible. For decades, law schools operated on one invisible assumption. As long as students could borrow the full cost of attendance, law schools did not need to constrain their tuition. So if tuition plus living expenses came out to $80,000 a year, $90,000 a year, or even $100,000 per year, the federal government would lend it to you automatically, but now that assumption is gone. Starting in July 1st of this year, Grad Plus loans disappear for new borrowers, federal borrowing caps apply to law students, and you're limited to roughly $50,000 per year in federal loans, a $200,000 lifetime loan cap for professional degrees, and this is not a small policy tweak. This is the financial foundation of law school being pulled out from under the system. Now let's do the math that most applicants have frankly just never had to do before. Take a very normal law school cost of attendance like $85,000 per year. Under the old system, federal loans covered nearly all of it. But under the new system, the loans are capped at $50,000, which leaves a $35,000 gap every single year. Now, over the course of 3 years, that's more than $100,000 you've got to fund in some other way. Could be through scholarships, your savings, family help, or private loans. Federal loans used to fill that gap, but they don't anymore. Now, there's a critical timing issue most people are missing. If you already borrowed federal loans for law school before July 1st, you might fall under the legacy rules. But if you start law school in fall of 2026 or later without prior borrowing, you are fully subject to the new caps, and Grad Plus loans are not available, and the federal loans will not stretch to cover tuition gaps. And this creates a hard dividing line between cohorts. The students applying now are the first ones forced to live entirely inside the new reality, with no safety net and no assumption of unlimited financing. Now let's layer in the second change happening at the exact same time. The states of Florida and Texas have moved to weaken or bypass the American Bar Association's control over law school accreditation, because the American Bar Association has become a political target, especially over DEI requirements and institutional mandates. The argument from these states is that they don't want a national accreditor enforcing ideological standards on who can train lawyers. That's the politics of it. But here's the part that matters for you regardless of politics. Uncertainty around law school accreditation increases the risk at the exact moment that financing is becoming harder. And the risk is what students, employers, and lenders all hate. When a lot of people hear that the states are breaking from the American Bar Association, they think that's great, you have more options, law school is going to get cheaper, you're going to have easier paths to becoming an attorney. But that's not what this is. Right now, these changes create permission to start and accredit law schools without the supporting infrastructure. Employers still care about the pedigree of being ABA approved, and judges still care about traditional credentials. And one reason for accreditation is to enforce bar passage rates and employment outcomes. There is a consumer protection role that ABA accreditation currently plays, and it's unclear what these new pathways will do to protect law school students. What's changing is that students are being invited to enroll in less proven pathways without the federal loan backstop that used to cushion bad decisions. So that's ultimately transferring risk from the institutions onto the students. And if only one of these things happened, either the Grad Plus loans being eliminated or the accreditation changing, the system could probably absorb one of the changes. But when you have both of them happening simultaneously, that starts to look more like a structural reset. Now, the unlimited federal money used to mask bad pricing decisions, and unquestioned accreditation used to mask bad outcomes. But both of those masks are slipping at the same time. So schools have to answer, can we justify this price without unlimited federal loans? Can we fill the seats if students can't borrow freely? And you, as the applicant, have to think to yourself, can you afford this under the loan caps? Is law school worth the downside risk if it's unaccredited by the ABA? And what happens if employment outcomes don't match the glossy marketing brochures? So going forward, you want to look at law schools as being in one of three buckets. The first bucket are the elite schools, like the T14 or the T20. Those schools have stronger outcome, they've got massive endowments, and they are insulated from the loan caps. Then secondly, you have solid regional schools, which are going to compete harder on scholarships and pricing. But the third bucket, that's the questionable one. Those schools have high tuition, but possibly pretty weak outcomes, and they don't have big endowments. And so those schools are the most exposed. Many won't adapt in time. And this is not speculation, it's just basic economics. Now, some people hear about the loan caps and they think that private loans are going to replace the federal loans. But private loans have higher interest, they're based on your credit, and they offer fewer protections. And during an economic downturn, they could disappear entirely. So they are not a backup plan. Now, when systems get unstable, institutions cling to stable signals. They don't abandon them. So scholarships are going to follow your LSAT medians. Rankings still reward selectivity based on the numbers, your LSAT score and your GPA. And employers are still going to infer quality based on the prestige of the school and its ranking in US News. And so as law school financing starts to tighten, your LSAT score becomes leverage. A better score won't just help you get into law school, it'll help you survive in this new environment. So given the changes, you want to look at your real 3-year net cost, not the sticker price of the school, but the actual cost of attendance you're going to pay in full, considering living expenses, for example, additional mandatory fees. You also want to think about the opportunity cost of going to law school. Then you also want to look at the outcomes based on bar passage rates, employment, geography, where you're going to apply. And you don't want to rely on private loans due to the interest. And if you are not yet done with the LSAT, you want to potentially retake the LSAT to use it as leverage for scholarship money to have more negotiation power, given that you don't want to have to resort to private loans. And you want to set a hard minimum aid threshold. Basically, you want to be willing to walk away if schools aren't offering you enough money. Because ultimately, I mean, debt doesn't care who's in the federal government. What matters is how you are affected financially. And so the elimination of the Grad Plus loans and the politicization of accreditation is going to reshape law school at the same time. And that combination is rather unforgiving for you as the law school applicant. Now, there are ways, of course, for you to maximize your outcomes, and it comes down to getting the highest LSAT score possible for the best scholarship offers. And so if you'd like my help preparing for the LSAT, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer for everybody watching this video now or later. private one-on-one Zoom video tutoring with me personally. Happy to help out anybody watching this now or later. I see a ton of questions coming into the chat. I will get to as many of those as I can. And as Ethan's mentioning here, if you click the link in my bio, you'll be able to access my YouTube channel with the recordings of all of these lives, as well as many other videos on everything LSAT and law school admissions. So feel free to check that out for more. Know that I'm offering these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and so I really do appreciate your spreading the word. I really do appreciate your support, sharing this in your Slack channels, Discord, subreddits, Facebook groups, group chats, wherever you're at. Do appreciate your sharing it to your socials. Means a lot to me. I see a question from Tom in the chat asking, does this mean those graduates can't sit for the bar in other states? So in other words, if you go to a non-ABA accredited school, will you be able to take the bar in other states? It's a very, very valid question. The truth is that you might not be able to. Depends on those states, whether those states have reciprocity for bar admission or willingness to allow you to sit for the bar. The default assumption is no, that you would not be able to. One of the benefits of going to an ABA accredited law school is that you have that guaranteed reciprocity. But if you go non-ABA, then you might not have the same portability of your JD into other states. And so consider for yourself, are you absolutely certain that you're going to want to stay in a given state for the entire rest of your legal career? Are you going to want to stay in Florida? Are you going to want to stay in Texas? What if you end up having to move across the country due to family obligations or your spouse, your significant other needing to relocate? Your JD may be worthless if you can't relocate and practice law in another state. So consider that, and of course, do the research before you go to law school so that you're making the best possible outcomes for your legal career, for your future. Kyle is asking, I got a 150 on the LSAT. Where can I get in? I have a 376 GPA. I'm not sure that's the best way to select a law school, is just to think to yourself, well, these are my numbers. Where can I get in? I think a better question is, where do you want to go to law school? Where do you want to practice? What states would you want to live in? Do you want to go to law school somewhere urban, somewhere suburban, somewhere rural? Where do you have family ties or friends? You don't want to go to just the best law school possible, regardless of location. Location certainly matters. You also want to look at bar passage rates. You want to look at employment outcomes. And so think to yourself, is there a law school worth going to with a 150 LSAT and a 376 GPA? Make a list of the law schools you want to go to. Look at where your numbers would make you competitive. What is the overlap in that Venn diagram of outcomes? And if there's no good options for you, then maybe you want to retake the LSAT to get better outcomes. For any given law school, you can see their medians. You can see what it would take to get into that school. Just Google Harvard Law 509 or Yale Law 509 or insert X Law School 509, and you'll be able to see the American Bar Association stats for last year's entering class, and you'll see where you're competitive with given numbers. Now, to be frank, and in my personal opinion, there aren't really a whole lot of law schools worth going to that will take you with a 150 LSAT score. 150 is, to be frank, it's below the average LSAT score. And so even if you technically could get into a given law school, you might not get a whole lot of scholarship money, if any, and these law schools typically don't have good bar passage rates or good employment outcomes. You'll have much better admissions outcomes with a 160 or a 165 LSAT than you will with a 150 LSAT. And so you might want to retake for better outcomes. As Ethan's saying to you, you can do better. Yeah, I think it's worth, yes, I agree, you can do better than 150. Just look at what would it take for you to get a higher LSAT score. Know that law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest score on your record, and so you can retake. There is no downside. The LSAT's offered 8 times a year. Coming up, we've got the LSAT in February, April, June, and then several test dates in the second half of 2026. Last year, it was offered in 4 consecutive months: August, September, October, and November. And of course, the February LSAT's only a couple weeks away. Not a whole lot of time to study for that one, and the deadline's already passed. But if you want to look for, say, April, June, or beyond, plenty of time for you to improve significantly. Ella just posted in the chat, Just got into law school. Everyone keep going. The LSAT sucks, but it's worth it. Congrats, Ella. Congrats on getting into law school. I'm glad that you rocked it. Congrats on your outcome. It is worth it. I mean, the LSAT can be a grind, but it's the easiest money you'll ever make. It's the best ROI you'll ever get because the LSAT is the biggest factor in the law school admissions process. A higher LSAT score gets you into better law schools, gets you more scholarship money as well. As I mentioned, the average cost of attendance for law school is roughly $84,000 per year times 3 for 3 years. That's $250,000 if you're paying sticker. But getting a higher LSAT score can significantly reduce the tuition that you're paying, get you big discounts off the sticker price, and so you're going to get much better scholarship offers with a higher LSAT score. I see Lacey saying here, I can't get past 145. I'm taking it in February. Well, let's see. What would it take for you to get past a 145? What would it take for you to get a 155 or a 165? You'll get much better outcomes with 10 or 20 points more than you will with where you're currently at. And so think to yourself, is there a type of studying that I have not yet taken advantage of that I could? Is there a resource I haven't used that I could? Have I only been self-studying with textbooks? Do I want to get a course? Do I want to get coaching? Do I want to take a class? At LSAT Unplugged, we offer all of the above. We offer private, comprehensive, one-on-one coaching programs. We have on-demand video courses. We have live small group classes as well, semi-private coaching sessions 4 nights a week. And I'm offering free LSAT tutoring as well for everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. A lot of these programs out there that you may have tried before, they only offer you videos or drilling. They don't offer you any personal feedback on what you're getting wrong and why. And so if you're looking for more personalized guidance, helping you craft a plan of attack to get you from where you're currently at to your goal score on your given time frame, I'm happy to help. If you're taking it in just a couple weeks, we're going to have a more intensive boot camp style approach with live coaching 7 days a week. If you're taking it on a longer time frame, we're going to have a more slow and steady approach where you'll have coaching maybe once or twice a week so that it's a more relaxed process and that you're not burning out, of course. When you're taking it in a month or less, we don't have a choice but to do it more intensively. But if you plan ahead, we can take a more slow and steady, which is more desirable and honestly ideal if you can swing it. No matter what you don't want to do is study out of an old, outdated textbook because the LSAT is online now. It's not on paper anymore. So you want to study like it's going to be on test day, not out of a book. And a lot of the books out there are also outdated. The LSAT's undergone a lot of changes in recent years. The biggest change a year and a half ago being the removal of the logic games section. Another big change that happened a few weeks ago was the removal of the comparative or dual passages for some test takers. Your LSAT books aren't going to talk about that, of course, because they can't update in real time. They're usually 1 year behind the times, if not 2 years behind the times. And so you want to use more personalized, up-to-date material. And so if you want to, I see Lacey's asking how to sign up for the free LSAT tutoring. The link is in my bio on TikTok and Instagram, and the link is below the video on YouTube as well. Happy to meet with you personally over Zoom video and talk through your situation to help you get the highest score possible on your time frame. Scanning through for other questions here. Cameron's asking, do law schools care about your undergrad school? No, law schools do not care about where you went to undergrad because they have no incentive to care about where you went to undergrad. Law schools are not evaluated based on that metric. Law schools are evaluated based on your LSAT score and your GPA because that's what gets reported to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News pulls their data from for inclusion in the law school rankings. And so if you went to a private university, if you went to an Ivy League, that's nice, of course, but ultimately doesn't really matter. If you went to a community college, also doesn't really matter. If you were certain that law school is the path you want to pursue, it might actually make sense for you to go to a lower ranked regional university or college or a community college, state school, save some money on tuition because what's going to matter for your career long term is where you went to law school and the prestige of your law school, not the prestige of your undergrad. So if you're in high school, if you're watching this early, if you're a gunner, maybe consider the community college or state school route. If it's already a done deal, of course, then it is what it is. But don't worry at all about where you went to undergrad. Just think about what's the best law school that you can get into with as much scholarship money as well. I see that Oscar is asking about, where's that question? Just got to get back to that. Scanning through here. Oscar's asking, how far out should you begin studying for the LSAT? Well, I typically recommend allowing at least 2 to 3 months to study, ideally 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential. Can you do it in less time? Yeah, you can, of course. But for the highest LSAT scores, it typically takes a bit more time because you want to get a lot more practice tests under your belt. There are currently 59 numbered release practice tests, numbered 101 to 159 in the new LSAT format on LSAC's Law Hub Advantage platform. You get 4 of them for free. The others you got to pay for, but it's well worth the investment considering that more practice material gives you more exposure to the patterns of the LSAT. And so you can't do 60 exams or 59 exams in just a month or two, or at least you should. We don't want you to burn out, right? And so slow and steady is the better approach. I think the majority of those who score a 175 or above tend to have put in more than 3 months on average, just anecdotally speaking. But can you do it in less? Maybe. If you need to, then you got to, and we'll take that more bootcamp style approach. We actually run LSAT bootcamps for students on tighter timeframes. If you want to talk through those boot camps, you can book the free call with me through the link in my bio, and I'll talk you through the details. But if you want a 175, if you want to work through every exam ever, then I'd recommend giving yourself closer to 5 to 6 months and aiming for the LSAT June at the earliest, or August if you can give yourself more time. And for those of you who are applying to law school this fall, to start law school a year and a half from now, you could aim for the April LSAT as your first take, the June LSAT as your second take, or maybe take the June as your first and August as your second take. Either way, you can apply to law school that the second the applications open in September. And it's good to apply earlier in the cycle rather than later if you can. Players Galaxy's asking, what's the best practice test to take for this year's April LSAT? So in general, there is no one best practice test to take. I'll say that on average, the more recent LSATs are more relevant. And so LSATs in the 150s, numbered in the 150s, were administered on average more recently than the older LSATs numbered 101, 102, 103, and so on. So you ideally want to study the more recent LSATs if you can. So typically what I'll suggest is that you build a study plan for yourself working from the older exams to the newer over time so that you're doing the LSATs in the 150s as test day approaches. And then you make a schedule for yourself. You budget them out where you'll say to yourself, okay, I'm going to do exams 158 and 159 in the final week of my test. I'll do exams 156 and 157 the week prior to that and just count backwards so that you're maybe starting at exam 130, working up to 159. And if you never do the first couple dozen, no big deal. You don't want to do the older ones at the expense of the newer ones. Just scanning through here for more questions. Thanks for all the questions coming in here. JR is asking, having a master's doesn't really matter either? Yes, correct. So your master's degree GPA is not factored into your LSAC calculated GPA. They only consider your undergrad GPA for law school admissions purposes. And so your master's GPA might be higher, but it's ultimately not going to be factored in. So don't over-index on the master's GPA. The undergrad GPA is what counts. That's what law schools are considering in their admissions index formulas. They're basically taking your LSAT score, giving it a higher weight, considering your undergrad GPA, giving it a little bit of a lower weight, and they're not weighting your master's GPA at all. It's not factored into the admissions calculations. And you can actually see the admissions indices for the vast majority of ABA-approved law schools. They're all listed on LSAC's website for those who have publicized them. And you'll be able to see specifically how they consider both LSAT and GPA. And fun fact, nearly every single one of the 200 or so ABA-approved law schools weighs your LSAT score more heavily than your undergrad GPA. Just a fun fact there. And for folks who are asking for practice questions, I can't legally share practice questions on these lives due to copyright. We don't want to get sued or shut down here. And so the best place to get practice questions for the LSAT is LSAC's Law Hub platform. You get 4 full practice tests for free on there, which is roughly 400 practice questions so that you can try it out, take a practice test, take a cold diagnostic, see where you stand, but don't over-index on that cold diagnostic. It's not an indication of your potential. All it's going to let you know is where you currently stand and that you probably have a lot of work ahead of you. And so I'd say use it as a benchmark from which to measure your later future progress, but don't take it as an indication of your potential on the LSAT. And know that wherever you're starting now, you can improve significantly. You can improve to a 180 if you're willing to put in the work. Your improvement's going to simply be a function of the amount that you study for the LSAT and the way in which you study. And so if you're only putting in a couple hours a week, might take you a year. If you're willing to put in 10, 15 hours a week, maybe you can knock it out in a couple of months. But we also got to look at the delta or the difference between where you're currently at and what you ultimately want to score. If you want to go from 140 to 180, it's going to take a lot of work. If you want to go from 160 to 170, it's going to take less work. But I personally believe that any score increase is possible. It's just a question of what you're willing to put in. I personally increased my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. And it took me an entire year, but at least half of that was a complete waste of time. If I'd done it properly, I could have knocked it out in just a couple of months because the LSAT is a test of pattern recognition. If you can spot the tricks and traps, you can avoid them. It all comes down to understanding how the test makers think and seeing it from their perspective. And once you do that, everything changes. So the pattern recognition element of the LSAT prep is ultimately the most important component. And that's why we have you take a lot of practice tests, do a lot of practice questions. The way we design study plans is based on the LASER approach to LSAT prep. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. And it's the cornerstone of my courses and my coaching programs. LASER, starting with learning, is building a strong foundation in the different sections, the different question types. A is for accuracy, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. But then we got to move on to sections, the third phase, doing individual timed sections under timed conditions to work on pacing and time management. Then we have E for exams and endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests so that test day itself will be like just another run-through. And then finally, R for review, using the Socratic review method. So that is the order of approach: learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. And what I typically find is that a lot of students will either spend too much time in the drilling phase under accuracy, where they just drill question after question, but they never get into timed work. Or on the flip side, students will spend too much time taking full-length practice tests without having built a strong foundation. And so both of them have their place. Drilling has its place, and exams have their place, but you want to build the foundation before taking practice tests, but you also don't want to neglect the practice tests for too long either. And so for every single student in our coaching programs, we create for you a custom study plan based on your weak areas, laying out exactly what to do every single day from now till the test. Now for review, it's not a matter of simply looking at the answer key, saying, oh, I get it now, how could I have been so dumb, and then moving on. You got to look at exactly what you're getting wrong and why so that you won't make the same mistake again. So we use a framework called the Socratic review method. The idea being, we want to drill down into exactly what you're getting wrong and why so that you can avoid making the same mistakes again. So for example, was your mistake coming from the argument, the question, or the choices? If it was in the argument, was it LSAC's failure to include key indicator words for evidence and conclusion or sufficient and necessary conditions? Did they include annoying words like except, unless, until, or without that are not easy to translate? Did they have both a sub-conclusion and a main conclusion? If your mistake was coming from the answer choices, was it a tempting wrong answer that tricked you or attracted you? Was it an unappealing right answer that discouraged you? Whatever the case may be, we want to make sure that you're getting all the juice out of what you're getting wrong and why, that you're extracting the key insights so that you won't make the same mistakes again. Because the LSAT is a test of patterns, they repeat themselves again and again and again. And until you can drill down into exactly what you're getting wrong and why, you may just end up making the same mistakes again. And that's what we want to help you avoid. And so if you like my help getting into that review process, going over exactly what it takes to get a top LSAT score, like I mentioned, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this live now or later as well on video. The link to book that call with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. I see Lacey scheduled her Zoom for 4 p.m. today. Awesome, Lacey. Looking forward to meeting with you, helping you break out of that 145 plateau and getting a higher score by the test in February, just a couple weeks away. And for those of you taking the LSAT in April, June, or beyond, happy to talk you through what your study plan could look like as well. I see Hunter is asking, I know this is an LSAT Q&A, but what about aside from the LSAT, what else can be done, like resume-wise and such? So we could talk admissions as well if you'd like. But my first question is, have you maxed out on the LSAT? Have you already hit a 180? Like, what makes you think that it's worth talking about something aside from the LSAT? Like, why focus on your resume if you haven't hit a 180 yet? Or not even hit a 170 yet? So if you don't mind my asking, Hunter, I mean, have you taken the LSAT officially? If so, what did you score? Why talk about the resume? Because the LSAT is the biggest factor in the law school admissions process. And so making marginal improvements to your resume, tweaking the font size, the line spacing, the bullet points, the wording of whether you led something or spearheaded it, or finagling over like synonyms for leadership positions, like none of that really matters, to be frank. Law school admissions is unlike undergrad admissions because law school admissions is mostly numbers-based. It's your LSAT score and your GPA. And your GPA, of course, is probably pretty fixed at this point in time. But your LSAT score, you've still got room to improve. And so I see a follow-up question from here. You're asking, if one person gets a 180 and one person gets a 165, but has an amazing resume, who would get accepted? On average, all else being equal, in my experience, it's probably going to be the person who got a 180. A 180 is a far higher score than a 165. There is no comparison. If you wanted to say 178 versus 180, 180 person has no resume, 178 has amazing resume, might be the 178. But when we're talking a 15-point gap and one of those applicants got a 180, it's going to be the 180 person 99% of the time, unless the 165 scorer also got the Nobel Peace Prize or something and earned it, by the way. So don't think about the resume here. If you got a 165, my big advice to you would be to retake the LSAT, at least get into the 170s. And of course, you want to think about what are your goals. I know there's a lot of context that we're missing here. I'm leaving all that aside and just speaking on average. But if you wanted to go to hypothetically, say, a top 14 law school, their LSAT medians are 170 to 174. And so a 165 puts you below the medians significantly. And a 180 puts you above the medians significantly. And law schools are not evaluated based on your resume or your extracurriculars or your essays. So you got to look at it from their perspective. What are their incentives? And of course, they want to have an incredible class. They don't want to have a class of a bunch of people who are nothing but numbers. They want people who have personalities, who've done impressive things, who will add to classroom discussions and such. But the LSAT, the reason it's used for admissions is that GPA inflation's out of control. GPA medians are roughly 3.9 for all of the top 14 law schools. And so your LSAT score is a more objective metric for which they can compare applicants from different backgrounds, from different majors, from different undergraduate institutions. And so that's what you want to focus on. At least get yourself into the 98th or 99th percentile, meaning you want to have a 173 or a 175 if you wanted a top 14 law school. And to JR's question here, a 180 LSAT score typically means that you got every single question right, or you got all but one of the questions right. And you could see the raw score conversions online if you'd like. And the LSAT score is the biggest factor. GPA is a secondary factor. And so if you're in a position with a high LSAT and a low GPA, that's going to make you a splitter applicant. But law schools actually love splitters. And they weigh LSAT scores more heavily than GPAs anyway, so better to have a high LSAT and a low GPA than a low LSAT and a high GPA. And if you're in the position where you have a low LSAT and a high GPA as a reverse splitter, then you can just retake the LSAT and have both a high LSAT and a high GPA. In contrast, if your GPA is low, you're not really going to be able to easily raise your GPA, but you still can raise your LSAT score. So that's why we focus on that for maximizing admissions. Rio is asking, I'm planning to take the LSAT in April. Is it smart to apply for fall 2026? I'm looking to get into a top 30 law school. So if you're looking for a top 30 law school, to be frank, the April LSAT is a bit late to apply for this cycle because you're applying only 4 months before classes start, and you're going to be past a lot of the law school application deadlines for this cycle. There will be exceptions, of course. You can contact admissions and ask them if they will still take the results of the April LSAT. A couple might, most won't. You're going to be better off taking the April LSAT and applying this fall to start law school in fall of 2027. And I know that nobody ever wants to push it back a year, but in some cases, when you are that late in the cycle, you're going to have better admissions, better scholarship offers when you delay things by a year. And the benefit of doing this as well is that if things don't go your way in April, you can still retake the LSAT in June as a backup if you need to. So my advice ultimately is don't rush it. Give yourself the time that you need to achieve the highest possible LSAT score and the best admissions outcomes as well. So that's ultimately what I would recommend. If you want to talk through particulars, of course, you can book the free tutoring lesson with me in the link in my bio. Those meetings, what we can do is we can talk through where you're currently scoring, what your goal score is, and how to get you to your goal score on your time frame. And of course, if you're taking in April, you've got roughly 2.5 months between now and then. That's plenty of time for you to improve your score significantly. If you're taking the LSAT in June, you've got 4.5 months, even more time. That's awesome. For those of you taking it in February, like Lacey, you only got a couple weeks, not a ton of time, but even a couple of targeted tutoring sessions here and there, if they can help you correct a misconception regarding a certain question type, help you find a more efficient approach, well worth having just a couple of sessions to get you that quick boost. And the thing is that ultimately, there's going to be some low-hanging fruit if you've never had the support before. And so once we add that support into the mix, there's usually a couple of quick wins to be had. And so if we can do anything to correct a misconception regarding one of the more common question types, one of the more high-yield areas, like in logical reasoning, for example, necessary assumption, inference, and flaw, those types are going to give you the most bang for your buck because those are the most common question types. And so we typically like to start with those rather than the less common types like parallel reasoning or evaluate the argument. I know that everybody hates parallel reasoning questions because they're so wordy, they're so convoluted, they're so long, but there are only a couple of them per exam. In contrast, the types I mentioned before, again, those are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. Those types are a lot more common. And so if we can improve your efficiency on those types, it's going to give you a bigger lift because the improvement is going to scale across several more questions per section and per exam. So for those of you taking the LSAT sooner, focus on necessary assumption, inference, and flaw in logical reasoning, and then the general global questions on reading comprehension like main idea, primary purpose, passage organization, title, tone, author's opinion. Those are typically where we want to start and maximize for those first. Now, if the LSAT feels random to you, that doesn't mean that you're bad at it. Most people who feel lost on the LSAT aren't dumb, and they're not missing some secret trick. They're just approaching the LSAT the wrong way. Because the LSAT isn't testing how smart you are. It's testing whether you can follow a clean process when you're under pressure. And so I want to give you one method you can use on basically every LSAT question you see, whether it's logical reasoning or reading comp. I want you to use the same mindset. Those are the only sections on the exam. They have different content, but students make the same mistakes on both. They rush early, then they panic later. They're going to blow through the stimulus or the passage, thinking they're saving time, but then they get stuck on the questions and the answer choices, second guessing everything. And high scorers do the opposite. They slow down early. They understand what's going on, and then they move quickly when it actually matters. Now, the reason most LSAT advice doesn't work is because it treats the symptoms, not the causes. Let's say you miss a flaw question, so someone tells you to memorize flaw types. You misinference questions so somebody gives you inference-specific tricks. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is shallow understanding. If you don't really understand the stimulus or the passage, the answer choices run the show. They sound tempting and they pull you in different directions. And if you do understand it, the choices get way easier to deal with. That's why the method I'm going to share with you is front-loaded. You do the thinking once up front instead of trying to think 5 different times in the answer. Now, these are the only 3 steps you need for logical reasoning. First, you understand and engage with every single sentence. Then, you tear the argument apart. And third, you predict before you look. This is regardless of the question types or reading the question stem first or the gimmicks. Those are the only 3 steps you got to take. And if you do those in order, the right answer stops feeling mysterious and the wrong answers start feeling kind of obvious. So let's get into the specifics. Step 1, you understand and engage with every sentence. This is where most people lose points quietly. Not because they can't read, but because they skim. They read like they're trying to get through the stimulus instead of actually understanding it. And so here is the rule I want you to follow. You don't move on from a sentence until you understand it, like you actually understand it. Then after each sentence, you react to it. You either agree with it, or you question it, or you're skeptical about it, and you notice if something feels unclear. And when you engage, you remember what you read. And when you remember it, you stay in control. And when you're in control, timing gets better on its own. If you don't understand the stimulus, the answer choices feel like noise. If you do understand it, the answers feel pre-sorted. Now, step 2, we tear the argument apart. Once you understand what they're saying, your job changes. Because now you are skeptical, you're critical, you are not taking what they say at face value. Most logical reasoning questions contain an argument, and your default assumption should always be, this is probably wrong, and your job is to figure out why. You want to look for the gap between the evidence and the conclusion. You want to look for what they're assuming without saying, and you want to look for alternate explanations they've ignored. So if the stimulus says X happened, so Y caused it, your brain should automatically go, okay, so what else could cause Y? If it says studies show A, therefore we should do B, you should ask, do those studies actually justify that move? You don't want to admire the argument, you want to pick it apart. And the LSAT isn't subtle about this. The arguments are meant to be flawed by design. They will always contain a gap. Now, the third step is you predict before you look. And this is the step that most people skip, but it's a huge mistake. Before you read any answer choices, I want you to pause and predict and ask yourself, what would fix this? What would weaken this? What assumption is holding this together? And your prediction doesn't have to have fancy wording. You just got to say something like, they're assuming no other cause exists, or they're assuming this sample applies to everyone, and that's enough. And that way, when you go to the answers, you're not guessing. You're comparing them. You're asking, which answer actually does the job I already know needs to be done? So let's take an example. Quote, cities that build more bike lanes tend to have less traffic congestion. Therefore, expanding bike lanes is the most effective way to reduce traffic. The first sentence has a correlation. The second sentence makes a causal leap. So what's the problem? They're assuming bike lanes caused the reduction, and they're ignoring other factors like public transit, city size, or population density. So your prediction should be that the right answer will point out an alternate explanation or challenge that causal leap. And that way, when you hit the answers, you're hunting for your prediction. Now, I want you to remember that most answers are wrong by definition. 1 is right, 4 are wrong. So your job is not to find something that feels good. Your job is to eliminate the junk answers. They're either too strong, they're too weak, they're off topic, or they restate something that's technically true, but useless. And if it doesn't address your predicted gap, it's probably out. Now in reading comp, it's the same idea with a different focus. It might feel harder because it's longer, but the process is actually simpler. Again, we've got 3 steps for reading comp. First, you understand and engage with every single sentence. Second, you track what the author actually thinks. And third, you summarize before the questions. So first step is you read actively, not quickly. If you rush the passage, you're setting yourself up to struggle. Most people skim, then they spend all the question time bouncing back and forth trying to find specific lines, and that is exhausting. High scorers read more slowly up front, but only once. If you don't understand the question, you reread it right away. If you don't understand a sentence, you also reread it right away, and that is you being efficient. Second step is, what does the author think? And that is the key to reading comp. After each paragraph, you ask, what is the author doing here? Do they agree? Do they disagree? Are they reporting somebody else's view? You're reading here not for information or for facts, but for perspective. A huge number of questions in reading comp come down to who believes what and where the author stands. So imagine a passage that says, some historians argue that trade declined because of political instability. Others argue that environmental factors played a larger role. Recent evidence suggests climate shifts disrupted agriculture, indirectly weakening trade. So let's ask, what do you know already? First, there are competing views, and the author leans toward the environmental explanation. So this way, before you see a single question, you already have the structure. Then step 3, you want to summarize before you get to the questions. So when you read the passage, you stop and you pause, and you summarize it in your own words. What's the topic? What's the main point? What's the author's opinion or their viewpoint? And once you do that, you're pretty much good and you know what the main point question is going to be. You are just going to then confirm your understanding. So to make this stick, for the next week, I want you to stop worrying about timing. On logical reasoning, you slow down, you translate each sentence, you ID the conclusion, you state the gap, and you predict. Then on reading comp, you read slower than might feel comfortable at first glance. You track the author's opinion. Then you summarize their viewpoint before you get to the questions. Speed's going to come later, but accuracy first and foremost. The accuracy will create the speed. Now, the LSAT isn't random, but it just punishes rushing and rewards your discipline. It comes down to understanding what the passage actually says. And if you run the same process on every single question, things are going to start to click and you'll stop second guessing. It's the same steps on every question, every section. That's how you build a high score. And if you'd like my help getting to that top score, reaching your full potential, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody out there watching this now or later, private one-on-one with me personally over a Zoom video. The link to book that free call is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. I see some questions in the chat. Bella was saying, I won a free session with you 4 years ago and I just passed the bar. Thanks. That is incredible, Bella. Awesome. Congrats on passing the bar. That's amazing. I'm glad that we got to meet. Honored to have been a part of your journey to getting there. Hope that you're rocking it. As a successful attorney now, I'm sure you're going to do great. Always love getting these updates. Cameron's asking, are there accommodations for ADHD during the LSAT? So yes, you can get accommodations for extra time, extra breaks. LSAC used to be really strict on accommodations and denied them to a lot of deserving students. They got sued several times. Now the pendulum has swung the other way, and they've become increasingly liberal about granting accommodations for extra time and extra breaks. Now you can get time and a half, double time, even potentially triple time. You can take the LSAT over the course of multiple days. You can get unlimited stop-start breaks, and so it's well worth exploring if you have ADHD. You just need a note from a qualified professional like a doctor, a psychiatrist, something of that nature. I see Patrick is asking, opinion on retaking a 177. It's probably a point of diminishing marginal returns if you already got a 177. I'm wondering if there is another area you might devote that time in order for you to maximize your outcomes. Like, are your application essays stellar? Are they perfect? Is there anything you could improve there? Have you already gotten into law school and gotten offers and you want to increase those offers even further? Could you maybe squeeze out higher scholarship money with a 180 over a 177? Maybe. I'm also wondering, what were your practice tests going into that test? And so if your practice tests were consistently above a 177, maybe worth retaking. If 177 was on the high end, though, and you got lucky, maybe not worth it. So I guess the question is there anything that you haven't yet done for your LSAT prep that you could do that you think could improve your score further? So I'm not going to say definitely yes or definitely no. It's really just a matter of whether you think you could do better. Good question, though. Got a question from Joshua asking, is England law school straight out of high school good if I want to come back to Canada? Not sure, to be frank. I'm American, so I'm typically speaking in the American context. I don't know too much about England or Canada when it comes to law school and such there. I would talk to practicing attorneys in Canada. They might be able to better advise you on that one. Nisi says, I have a high GPA and a low LSAT score. Cool. Well, that's better than having a low GPA and a high LSAT because we can improve your LSAT. That's just 1 day, 2.5 hours. Improving your GPA would be redoing all of undergrad, 3-4 years maybe. But your LSAT score, you can improve it in a single day, 2.5 hours. Of course, there's the studying that goes into improving your LSAT score, but I guess I'm curious what you've put into your LSAT prep so far. Like I was saying to Paprika, like, is there support that you haven't gotten that you could get that might improve your studying, that might improve your outcomes? Did you just self-study before? Did you only put in a few hours per week? Can you put in more time and can you get yourself more support? Is there a resource or guidance that you have not yet taken advantage of that you could take advantage of that might improve your odds? Have you had private tutoring? Have you taken a course? Have you gotten live support and feedback on your personal thought process? Or have you just been self-studying with videos and practice questions or textbooks? Where are you currently scoring and what's your goal? Did you underperform on test day? A lot of students will drop from the practice test to the actual, maybe due to nerves and anxiety, due to not properly simulating test day conditions, a bad proctor, tech issues. And so if we can mitigate or eliminate those factors that would decrease your performance, we can then help you raise your score. And it may just be that you haven't given yourself enough time to achieve your fullest potential. And so maybe giving yourself more time and more support could improve your score. Then you'll have much better outcomes. And now you're going to have a high GPA and a high LSAT, much better outcomes for admissions. I see you're saying here, your highest score was a 150. You're taking the LSAT in April for your 3rd time, and you recognize that you need to review differently. So there we have it. It might just be a matter of reviewing differently. And so what has your review process looked like up to this point? A lot of students will just look at the answer key, say, and say to themselves, I was down to A and C. I chose A, but it's C. I get it now. Makes sense. And then they move on. But they're not really getting down to the root cause of why they chose the wrong answer. What was off about your process? So it's not about the particular question in front of you. It's about the process, step by step, that led you down the wrong path. And you want to figure out what could you do differently next time around to change the outcome. So like there's a step-by-step approach for logical reasoning, step-by-step for reading comp as well. Is your process efficient? Is it getting you good results? If not, we got to change the process. We got to collect the data and figure out what are the trends in what you're getting wrong and why. Are there certain methods of reasoning? Are there certain question types that you need to work on? Maybe you want to drill those types. Maybe you want to get some more personalized support looking at your process. Sometimes we'll have students video themselves walking through questions, talking them through, so we could figure out where you're spending too much time, where you got to get more efficient, what misconceptions you are under, so we can change your approach for next time. It might be that you drilled too much or didn't drill enough, or that you took too many practice tests or not enough. We can craft a personalized study plan for you to make sure that you're using your study time as efficiently as possible to make maximal gains. You're taking it in April, you've got 2.5 months, plenty of time to improve if you change up your studying, if you study the right way. And so if you want to talk through your study plan with me, happy to meet. You can book the free tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Happy to talk through particulars, help you craft your plan of attack. Scanning through here for more questions. Thanks for all the great questions, folks. Keep them coming. Andy's asking, is a 3.4 GPA unrealistic for a top 14 law school, even with a 170 plus LSAT? Well, 170 plus LSAT is a pretty wide range. We have the entire range of 170 to 180, right? So are we talking about having a 171 or having a 180? 3.4 GPA puts you below the T14 medians. Their GPA medians are 3.9-ish. And so if you're below the median significantly, you want to be significantly above on the LSAT median to compensate. So if you have a 177 plus, it's possible. If you have a 170 or 171, it's pretty unlikely, all else being equal. Now, to be clear, softs can play a role, and they can be a tiebreaker if you're close on the numbers, but a 3.4 GPA is significantly below on the GPA median, so you want to be significantly above on the LSAT median to compensate. But I need more specifics about the LSAT to better advise you on this, but I'd advise you aim for 177 plus to compensate for the GPA. Milan's asking, how important is working for a firm for 4 years? It's a nice to have, better than not having it. Law schools love to see that you have real world exposure to the practice of law, but more important is having the numbers. So if you have the LSAT score and the GPA, it's working for a law firm's icing on the cake, but it's not going to compensate for not having the numbers. But if you do have the work experience for a law firm working as a paralegal, for example, definitely talk about it in your application essays, highlight it on your resume, get related letters of recommendation if you can. That's certainly going to help. I see a question from JD asking, it's my senior year. I'm assuming senior year in college, you mean? Something happened to inspire me to go to law school. Is fall possible? So you're saying that I'm gathering that you recently had some life experience that inspired you to go to law school, and now you want to go to law school this fall in roughly 8 months. And this is just all very, very recent for you, like in the past couple weeks or so. I mean, it's a tight time frame, to be frank. You'd probably want it. The deadline for the February LSAT's already passed, and so the next upcoming LSAT you could take is the April LSAT. So the idea being you want to study for the LSAT in the next 2.5 months, also work on your application essays, and then go straight from undergrad to law school this fall. A lot of law schools will not take the results of the April LSAT. Some will for starting law school roughly 4 months later after that LSAT test date. It's technically possible though, but it's a bit of a tight time frame. It's a bit harder to get in, less scholarship money available. You technically can do it, but to get into better law schools with more scholarship money, I'd probably recommend delaying things a year, having a gap between undergrad and law school so that you can apply at the beginning of the cycle in this fall to start law school in fall 2027. So you can do it sooner if you're really in a hurry. You can make it happen. I can support you in that, but you're going to have better outcomes if you wait a year. See a question, Milan asking, is studying for the LSAT the summer before sophomore year crazy? And I'd continue to study for the next 2 years. Okay, so let's say that you're finishing up freshman year, and then you're going to study for the LSAT over the summer, and then study for the next 2 years after that. I don't think you need to do that. I mean, your LSAT score is good for 5 years, so if you wanted to take it before sophomore year and then maybe go straight from undergrad into law school, you could do it. But you also don't need 2 years or more to study for the LSAT. You can do this in 3 to 6 months. More times better, up to a point. But you also want to maintain a high undergraduate GPA, and you also want to enjoy yourself and explore whether law school is actually something that you really want to do. So you can do it. More time is helpful to a point, but you might be better off just enjoying undergrad, exploring whether law is what you really want to pursue, and maintaining a high undergraduate GPA. The LSAT's not going anywhere. You can come back as a junior, study for it over the course of 6 months, still rock it, get a top score, and then go on to law school just the same. And you're saying you have a 4.0 and you would maintain that 4.0? Good. I mean, if you can maintain it, great. Then I'm fine with you studying for the LSAT, but it's a lot to balance. So just keep that in mind, be realistic, be reasonable about it. And keep in mind that you don't need 2 years. You could do it in a lot less time if you'd like. So folks, if you're finding this helpful, again, please spread the word. The only way these lives grow is through word of mouth. Please share it to your socials on Discord, subreddits, Facebook groups, group chats, Wherever you're with other pre-laws, anyone else studying for the LSAT, I do appreciate your support. If you'd like my help personally, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. The link again is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.